You are now tuned into the Rate Limited podcast with your host, Ray Fernando. Also, Adam Larson, aka Gosu Coder, and we have Eric Provencher, the founder of Repo Prompt. We are all AI practitioners here, and we got some really spicy takes. This is going to be our last episode of 2025, and we're going to go over some predictions that we hope will be really interesting to look back in 2026 at the end of the year. And we also have some stuff going on with Gemini 3 Flash. It literally just announced right now. Also, GPT 5.2 has been released, and we got a whole bunch of stuff going in on that. So, Eric, I want you to go ahead and take away.
Yeah, thank you, Ray. So really a special episode this week. And, it's crazy. Just as we finished recording the episode last week, the next day, that's when GPT 5.2 drops. We wanted to go over it. We didn't have the time before the episode went live, but you know what? We've had some time to play with it, and I think there's a lot to talk about here. So before I get into my thoughts on it, I want to hear, Adam, have you spent a lot of time with 5.2? What do you think about it?
So I actually have, and it is, in my opinion, definitely better than 5.1 in specific coding. Like I'm talking about in the coding world. But I will say, Opus is really, honestly, harmed, I don't know another way to put it, but Opus has spoiled me from every other model, because even when I go to 5.2, I still get frustrated with it. Its steerability is kind of tough, in my opinion. It ends up in a place where I have a hard time guiding it to do the thing that I want. In fact, I have some agents that we were building from 5.1 to 5.2. 5.2 actually responds to my system prompt differently. I actually had to update my system prompt to get some of the updates done. So 5.2 was so rigid and to the letter and to the rules on things. And it actually would take it overboard. So I had to tone it down a little bit. But from a coding perspective, I think it's great. I think if Opus 4.5 wouldn't have come out, it would be up there with the sonnets of the world. It's still slower. I also want to say I was very surprised it was more expensive. When I first saw it, I just kind of assumed it would be the same price. So I was very surprised it came out 40% higher. So it's clear that this is probably a new base model, new pre-trained version or something that's actually more expensive. Maybe the price will come down over time. But it is not my favorite coding model right now, unfortunately. But it's still a good model.
So I have to ask, what reasoning level were you testing it on?
I usually go medium across the board. So I have not done much on high, to be fair. Yeah.
Yes. So a lot of people, have been trying the new extra high reasoning. And I think that one's probably overkill in most cases. But I'm curious, and it doesn't sound like you did, but I've been very surprised by the low reasoning effort. And I think in many cases, it's really worth trying. A lot of folks on my Discord are basically comparing it in intelligence to Opus 4.5 at low. And I think it's a lot more responsive and steerable at that level. So it's worth considering. And before I get into my thoughts, I want to hear from you, Ray. Have you had the chance to play with 5.2 much, and where have you tried it, and what have you tried building with it?
Yeah, so I've tried 5.2 inside of Cursor, low, medium, high. And I've also tried it inside of Droid, low, medium, high. I've tried it in plan modes, and I've also tried it in verification for bug fixes. I'm actually making a game for the first time in the backend has some Rust modules. I never wrote Rust in my life, but I'm really good at bug fixing and finding bugs and things. And I also have some front end code as well. And so I had to do some code verification tasks. And I said, hey, I have this plan. I just ran a whole bunch of stuff, and here's my actual status of everything we checked. GPT 5.2, let's go ahead and get to work. So I ran all three tests, low, medium, high in Cursor, and also low, medium, high with GPT 5.2 in Droid. All of them missed the mark and called out nearly zero critical bug fixes. And it kind of didn't really matter whether it was high or medium. They call maybe one. I was actually surprised that the medium one called out zero. It says zero critical bugs. And then as soon as I switched it over to Opus, it was oh yeah, here's a bunch of critical fixes. And I was I thought so, and I was actually reviewing the bugs, and it's that's interesting. But what it calls critical and what it calls high is actually, it's almost pedantic in a funny way. So I don't really know if it's the language model's super seriousness about the language of that's not critical or this one's high. And to me, working game development, especially back end with Rust or something, you kind of want to call these out as critical in this early phases. But I don't know if it's a context thing. But I said, okay, let me just do one more experiment. Let me flip it over to 5.1 Codex and then Codex Max as well. And so those two went an incredible job. And so now I was like, okay, if I'm doing a code verification or verifying any type of code that requires like a lot of this tooling type of stuff in both either Droid or any pretty much any agent, I'm basically just using Codex, 5.1 Codex. So it's really weird because I love 5.2, the idea, but for coding right now, it just doesn't really seem to be on the mark.
Interesting. So, I always tend to use these 5 series models kind of more as like oracles, as like models that will, do some planning, do some heavy thinking on issues, not as like a dynamic agent. So it's interesting to me that, Codex, I think especially in Cursor and in Droid, it makes sense to me that the Codex models would be better at like kind of navigating the code base, thinking about the tools. But for my uses with the tooling, I find 5.2 is better than 5.1 Max, especially at like identifying what's relevant in terms of context to look at, like slicing up context, like adhering to the prompts. It's definitely smarter. I'm finding it's a little bit slower. It's using up usage limits a lot faster too. So a lot of the folks on my Discord are using the Codex Pro plan with ChatGPT, and I've seen reports where like one prompt on Medium can use up 15% of their weekly limit, or at least of their daily limit. But weekly limits are getting chewed up faster. And I was talking to Pete Steinberger on X, and he was saying, and he's notorious for running so many things in parallel. And he was saying that he goes through one pro plan in 2 days with 5 to 10 parallel agents at a time. So that's nuts. But like that's definitely a top 0.1% user because he just wants to vibe everything off, just small prompts, go in parallel, do all the things. So yeah.
That's violent coding, bro.
Oh,
Yeah.
I saw you talk about that. You want to share a little bit more about your violent coding just while we're here on the violent coding note?
Yeah, I wrote a kind of like a meme post which says Andrei Karpathy coded vibe coding is like kind of what he coined. And I was like, I basically have been using Cursor a lot in the latest Opus update, and low-key it's very addicting, just like what Adam was saying. And I mean, every day I'm climbing up to like tens of millions to 20 million to like now almost hundreds of millions of tokens for just a day cumulatively, and it's kind of spiraling out of control, to be honest. But I'm actually working the entire time, and I haven't felt so enthralled where like not only it's just I'm in a seat for at least like I have a live stream 6 hours in a seat coding nonstop, barely going to the bathroom. Like it's just that I have a problem, ladies and gentlemen. I admit I have a problem. I code too much. And I have coined this violent coding. So if literally you're just throwing all of the tokens, you're just guiding, that's all you're doing. So it's like,
that's insane.
It's been really fun though.
Yeah, I really do think that like coding with AI, is very addiction prone. Like it's very easy to kind of fall into it and then just one more prompt, I'm just gonna do one last thing. I'm about to get up. Let me just start a task and then I'll come back. And then you're just sitting there watching it work. And then you're like, oh, well, maybe I'll just do one more. I'll just do the next step. And it never ends.
So what's funny is like we were doing some pair programming and I was watching, pair programming is very different now because you're actually just typing in Cursor or Claude Code or whatever. And then I'm watching, because you'll work with some people that don't really read the code. They really are just kind of looking at functionality. And I'll see it make change. I'm like, whoa, it should be making that changes. They're like, no, it looks fine to me. I'm like, no, it should not be doing that. Like, we should stop it right there.
Oh,
it's like a really different world now.
Yeah.
Pair programming is very different.
Yeah. And it is interesting to see the people who just like accept all the changes and kind of take a look after, if at all. Yep. Some people are now they'll just do all the changes, accept all, then have an AI do a review, accept all, move on, merge, and then, like that's a little too much for me. I don't think we're quite there yet. But then there's the other spectrum of people, maybe like you, Adam, where you're like watching it work, every line edit. Wait, we got to interrupt you here. We're going to stop you there. So
actually kind of doing a blend of both. I actually set this out as a way for me to learn Rust. So I don't want to get held back by the syntax. And I was like, this kind of looks like C. It's kind of cute. And there's all these little things. So like whenever I hit a bug, I'm like, wait, shouldn't that be like indexed? Because I'm running this on the server. And so I'm just asking more questions. And I think that's kind of what's eating up a lot of my tokens, like the research parts of it, like finding things in the code and kind of saying, what's this shape? Like, how does this relate to this or something? And so it's more interactive learning. It does cost a lot more, obviously, but hey.
I wanted to ask you on that one actually. So last week, we talked a little bit about forking and branching. Are you, Ray, doing that when you're doing these side explorations and adventures?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the biggest thing, especially in Cursor, is to just immediately start a new chat, debugging, working on things like that, start another chat and bring stuff in. And so I kind of on my live stream have made a more simpler flow. So I start with the big architecture document, and then I have one called current status. And so that will always be the current status of what's going on. A couple hundreds of lines. I don't really want it to be very long. So that way I can keep mentally in my head like what I'm working on, but also I can keep passing that into my various chats back and forth. It's pretty fun once you get used to a workflow. And I think I maybe want to call this out that I feel like all of the agents have, maybe I want to get your guys' take too. All of the agents are now very, very capable. It's just ergonomics of how you interact with the model. So, I got so spoiled in just keeping one session with Droid, but then going back into Cursor, it's like, okay, now I just kind of have to be very prescriptive and hand things off and be very precise. And so therefore I'm working in this new manner. And once you get in flow, you go really in flow and it feels like it's the best tool ever. With Rust, I had to set up the hooks. So I'm like, okay, cool. Cursor now has this. Like everything is that I was wanting in Claude Code is everywhere else now. And so, I just set up hooks to at build time, it will run, build the types. The front end is expecting them. By the time the agent gets to the front end code, it already has what it needs. And it knows what code to write. It's so beautiful once that it like everyone's been sharing kind of publicly, and I think it's been to the benefit of most people for 2025 for agentic coding, I feel.
Yeah, right on. I think it's super important to set up your good tooling and environment to make sure that you're able to give the agents what they need to like verify their work as they go. And I think, you're talking about game dev. I think that's actually one of the areas where it's quite tricky to kind of make everything verifiable, because you do have to kind of hit play and try it out and see how it feels, because there's just no way the agents are going to get there. So I think that's actually something that we should talk about in our predictions, like what we're going to go in terms of this testing loop. But before we get to that, and I just want to kind of just stay on the one last piece of the 5.2 release. So I wanted to ask you all, have you all tried GPT 5.2 Pro? That just came out, and I'm curious. Adam, no, you haven't tried it at all?
I have not tried it yet. No.
I've only given it my architecture docs and had it go give me some feedback, but that's actually what I was going to hit you up. Maybe I'll hit you up for my live stream, because I want you to walk me through this cool flow that you have where it's supposed to apparently go through my repo. And I remember this from the 01 Pro days, and that's really where I fell in love with Repo Prompt. Was because of just trying to leverage the intelligence of the model and giving it like literally all of the code. I would love to learn more about that workflow, Eric.
Yeah, I'd love to hop on with you, Ray. It's easier than ever now. So the way that I work with it is that, so in Repo Prompt, I have this feature called the Context Builder, and it can connect to Claude Code, Codex, or Gemini with the CLIs directly. And then you just pick the model. There's actually a recommendation system now, so you can just click run and it'll auto set up the app with what you've got. You just type what you want to work on. It will build a prompt from all of the most relevant files in your code base, improve your task into a more GPT-5 like optimized prompt, and then you can just hand that off to 5 Pro or do some planning directly in the app. So I've been using 5.2 Pro a lot with this, and it's interesting. Like there's certain tasks where you're not really going to see the benefit of it because it's not like complex enough. But there's two big things I think 5.2 Pro is really good at. And one of them is just being fully like if you give it a task and you want it to like fully think through like end to end everything it needs to consider, like the Pro models are just like unmatched at that. They will think through every edge case, every scenario, everything that you need to think about A to Z, like in one shot. And that's just like so invaluable if you're giving that to like another model to implement. Like it will just flesh out whatever like idea you have for a spec into like complete architecture, like fully solved. And then the other thing that I find it's really good at is sort of like simulating the code in its mind. It's a weird thing to think about, but like I was running into a race condition with some of my MCP transport. It's very complicated logic, and I'm using Unix sockets, which are like a low-level primitive in Linux-based systems like macOS and Linux. And there was getting some issue with starvation, and I was running through it, printing logs, going with Opus, and I ran through it with GPT 5.2, even 5.1 before. Nothing was solving it, but then I just give what I found with the logs and the relevant code to 5.2 Pro, and it's like, oh, there it is. There's the bug. Here's how you fix it. Done. And it was finished. And it worked perfectly right after. it's just for that, you can spend hours burning millions of tokens with other models, going in circles, and you're never going to solve the bug. But then if you just take the time to organize yourself, give it to 5.2 Pro, you'll wait a while longer for that prompt to finish, but it might end up saving you time because you won't have to sit there and wait for the agent to debug. So worth looking at.
Are you doing this primarily through the web interface? Is that how you're kind of working with it, or do you do it via the API?
The API is so expensive, especially
I
with
was
that
about to say,
40% increase.
I just looked up the price. It's $21 on the million input and 168 on the output. So that's why I was curious.
Yeah. So the thing is, like, there is a limitation on the web interface, which is that it only accepts 60,000 tokens before it cuts off your prompt. And so then it might accept more, but then part of your prompt's not making it to the model, so you don't see it. So at 60K tokens, it's pretty safe. So that's tricky to do in some cases. Like, I built my tooling with ReproPrompt around it, so like it's able to hit a token budget like on the mark, and just compress like parts of your files, like by cutting out things that are not relevant. So you're able to get really just the most essential chunk that you can fit in 60K tokens, give it to the model, and it works. So for me, that's very good. The API is good if you need more than that, and there's some people in my Discord who are doing it, but like I've seen people like spend, it's in a day you can easily spend hundreds of dollars just like prompting this model, like, and it doesn't support caching at all. So you're just like, every prompt is and it's 12x the cost of 5.2 Pro, so it's even more than 40% more than 5.1 Pro was, and 5.1 Pro was on the API, so 5 Pro was. It's very expensive on the API, but like I said, like sometimes you need to turn to it because it's just so much smarter. And in those times, you're happy you spent it because it was worth it. But the web interface, really nice. Okay, so that's a little wrap on that. I just want to ask, have any of you spent any time at all looking at Gemini 3 Flash? And I'm curious, like, no, not at all. Ray, no. Go, Adam?
I mean, it came out just today, like as of recording. So
Yeah.
I know, Eric, I know we both get early access to the stuff, so I knew it was coming, but I didn't know the exact timeline when it was going to release. So I didn't have a lot of time to look into it. I do actually use 2.5 Flash a lot for some internal, like, agentic stuff we're doing. I'm very excited to see what Gemini 3 Flash does, and in particular, I care a lot about the speed, so I hope the speed is actually reasonably good. The cost seems okay. But if it's as fast or faster than Gemini 2.5 Pro, or 2.5 Flash, I'm actually very excited about it because you were telling me, and I'll hand this over to you, that it's actually performing pretty well with your tests.
Yeah. So, I mean, I haven't had a chance to do a lot of tool calling use for it yet, because, like, I don't have a sufficiently well set up infra for like the new Google API and stuff. So a lot of the times when the models release, when I'm testing them with ReproPrompt directly, I use them through the Gemini harness, the Gemini CLI harness, and that one I don't get early access to at all. So what I did get is to try Gemini 3 Flash over the API with the OpenAI completion API, and I'm able to benchmark the model that way. And what I did find is that it actually did better than Gemini 3 Pro did on the bench. And that was really interesting to see. Gemini 3 Pro was not a top contender. Gemini 2.5 Pro did much better than any of these models at these tasks. But I think Gemini 3 Flash is a solid, like, no holds barred upgrade over 2.5 Flash, but it is more expensive, so it's worth considering that. I think, though, in terms of its ability to call tools, its ability to reason, I think it's going to be an interesting model to play with, and I think it might serve. I think it's going to be like in where I'm positioning it is that it's much smarter than Haiku. It's similar price to Haiku though, so there's a big price increase with this one. But like for a lot of tasks, for the speed and costs and latency, you're gonna want to turn to it for maybe sub-agent workflow. So if you've got sub-agents in your coding setup, or you want to find context, do certain things, I think it's going to be a great fit for that. And I'm excited to see where that turns out in the new year. And I'm excited to play with it some more. So that's my thoughts on it. So I think that does a nice tour of our new model releases. So I'm going to hand it over to Adam now to talk a little bit about our look for the new year, or look back on this year a little bit, and where we're going. So take it away.
I'm super excited about this. I've been thinking about this since Eric brought up the idea of this. I think it was Eric. It was you that brought up the idea of this special episode. So what the idea behind this is, what we want to do is kind of give our sort of recap of this year, but also make predictions for what we think is going to happen next year, so we can revisit this next year. If we think back to the beginning of 2025, Eric, you mentioned this at the beginning when we were in the pre-show that we were doing. We talked about DeepSeek. DeepSeek was such a big deal, but you don't hear anyone talking about it now. Like, we have no idea what's going to actually happen, but I think it's always fun to kind of try to do this prediction. So anyway, I'm going to start a roundtable here. So, Ray, what was your biggest surprise of 2025? And we're going to keep it very focused on the AI lab. So, for example, this would be like Google, OpenAI, Meta, Anthropic, Quinn, DeepSeek, all of those. What was your biggest surprise of 2025 in regards to AI labs?
I think my biggest surprise, and it's going to be a little funny here, but I think it's more on Anthropic's model, to be honest, and Opus 4.5, that just how much better it is at everything, especially coding, tool calling. It's really, really addictive, and I didn't think it was going to be here this soon. I thought it would just be like next year type of thing, because I think about last year with 3.5 Sonnet, and when that came out, like that really changed the game for coding, and even changed the game for Cursor too. Like that put really Cursor on the map for, composer view. And so I feel like this latest model, especially with, I think it was Lee Robb from Cursor actually saying, hey, I migrated our CMS over, and we basically, I think he used that model primarily. It's me doing game development also primarily with that model too. I'm not a game developer, and it's unlocking this new workflow that, like, I've been always putting these things in the back burner because I don't want to keep, managing all these contexts and creating new chats. I have way more confidence now, probably like a junior engineer that feels like he's like, just learned how to code and made his first commit, like I have that level of confidence that I feel like I could just tackle any problem in the world right now. So that, I think, to me, it's been my biggest surprise of 2025.
That's awesome. How about you, Eric?
So, we're going to talk a little bit more about coding agents, and there's a lot that surprised me in that as well. Like, I think to Ray's point, like, the Opus models, and to me for Opus 4 was like a bit more of that moment for me than Opus 4.5. But I think the biggest thing for me that really surprised me was just how good image models and video models became this year. And it's something that actually like upsets me in some way, because it sort of marked the death of any credibility whatsoever of any content you see online anymore.
Yep.
With Nano Banana now that just came out, but like earlier this year there was the GPT models where they can do text really well. Sorry, the GPT AI like image model. I think for me the biggest shock is that all that stuff is like near flawless now. Like the videos still have a way to go, but the image models are so good that like, yeah, there's just no real tells anymore, and it's a weird world we live in now.
Yep. So I agree with both of you. My biggest surprise, I'm actually going to take a different twist. It's going to be Meta. So I was actually very bullish on Meta at the beginning of the year. If you think about Llama 3, how much they've impacted the open source ecosystem, they were like the darlings of open source models. And Llama 4 came out, and it was one of the biggest disappointments that I think I personally witnessed in 2025. Like, I don't know if you all agree, but and Meta, in that a lot of people have left, there's been people laid off, they've dumped tons of money on trying to acquire, people from these other labs. So for me, the biggest surprise was how far Meta has fallen in 2025. And I think the question will be, are they going to be able to recoup and come back going into the next year?
Can I add a spicy take that's a little bit tangential to this? I guess I'll go after you a little bit. But
yeah, go for it.
But I think if we're talking about like biggest, also like upset maybe, or surprise, like mine was very positive, but like the one that really kind of put a lot of salt in my like thinking was the windsurf, like whatever happened there. I feel really bad for a lot of people in that situation, because there's just too many different things going on. And from externally, obviously, that's all we're seeing. But if I was an employee of that company, I'd be like, what just happened, right? And you're either in Team Google as part of a core team, or you're like, part of like Devin's team.
The rest.
And then people who, worked at cognition or something like that, you're pretty much working nonstop. And I think everyone is in this valley anyways, but it was a little like, oh man, that could have been something really cool.
Well, to be honest, that actually happened with Scale AI as well, where they
Mm-hmm.
basically just took Alexander Wang, maybe a couple of core people, and then left the rest of the company behind. And then Character AI, similar thing happened with Noam Chazir. So, and then two of those are Google doing it. So it's an interesting move for Google to do that kind of a move where they just gut a company and leave the scraps behind. Yeah, I get it for regulatory reasons, but interesting moves in 2025 for sure.
All right, so we're gonna move over to what our predictions are for who will win 2026. Now, again, this is very much focused on like the AI models themselves or the AI lab. So that it could be OpenAI, Google, Anthropic, Quinn, and there's really two categories here. There's individual consumers, which are going to be using models very differently than enterprise customers who potentially what we like to focus on is coding. So maybe we could separate the two. We'll talk about biggest winner prediction for 2026 on the enterprise coding side, and then we can talk about it on the consumer and maybe the consumer coding side, and how we play there. Eric, I'll start with you this time.
So I mean, for me, I think as much as I really enjoy OpenAI models and I find them essential to my workflow, like I have to admit that my workflows are perhaps a little bit complex for some people, and a lot of people just want to prompt and get results. And I think in enterprise, that's going to be like the most important way to work for getting those users. So for me, I think like in enterprise coding, it's assuming Anthropic doesn't misstep, like they've nailed the enterprise side, like in a way that I don't think anyone else really saw coming at the start of 2025. Like they really just came in and like their API consumption is dominating. Their models are gotten a lot smarter than I think they would have been by the end of this year. So I don't want to count out OpenAI though, because they do have apparently some breakthroughs that are going to come in. So, we'll see. But I think in terms of just model personality and just getting a good coworker in, Anthropic is really set to win that one. So I think that's my enterprise side. Why don't we go around here? You guys, the enterprise side, we'll come back for consumer. I think it's probably a good way.
All right, Ray,
Yeah.
how about you?
This may be a little bit surprising, but I think Cursor may actually start to enter into this game. I don't know why. I'm hearing a lot of my tech bros here in Silicon Valley, like they're getting access to be allowed to use Cursor, like legit, following all these different protocols and stuff. And the recent addition of their designer mode and, hearing whispers of these other things that they're going to drop in the future and stuff, it's not necessarily specifically towards enterprise, but it's going to be a premier tool. And I think about the Figmas in the world. I think about the linears in the world who are doing project planning. I think about all these different capabilities in the SWE work system, and that this tool is going to just kind of get dropped right in, and allow these people to kind of do their work. It's not that this is going to be like the best coding model or best coding agent, but in terms of what you do at these types of companies, you're doing dirty work still, as an employee. You're the person who's hired with the expertise who has to execute. And I think they can start chipping away at these smaller features of these other companies that are already established, and start making ground more in the like AI automation. So if I'm an enterprise CEO and you want to get a quick, like, I want to share my shareholders, I'm doing something with AI, adding Cursor to it, and be like, this thing is already autonomous. And look at these other use cases. It's an easy sell to your, shareholders. It's easy sell to your employees because they like it already, or not, and management and all that stuff. And like kind of checks a lot of boxes. And I think they're not the best at like digging in large code bases. Maybe, I don't know, but I don't think it's a problem that they have to solve exactly right now. But it's probably on the roadmap, right? So that's kind of where I'm going with that.
So, it's funny that you bring up Cursor because they are kind of starting to become what I would consider an AI lab, in with the composer model. So it will be interesting to watch them. And I do think we'll talk about this a little bit more, but I do think they've sort of locked in the enterprise space pretty well right now based on all the connections I have across all the companies. Like Cursor is just like the thing that a lot of these companies use. But my prediction is Google, and it has been almost since the very beginning. If you think about the data and the culture that Google has, I feel like they have everything in their favor to be the leading like AI frontier lab. Think about the bets that they've taken with the TPUs that they actually they're not even solely like dependent on Nvidia, so they've got like their own infrastructure arm. They've got Gemini 3 Pro, which is a pretty fantastic model. You go back to the beginning of 2025, they were pretty far behind. Like they have caught up a lot. And I see, whatever Gemini 3.5, like they're just going to keep moving forward and keep grinding. They're investing into a lot of bets that I think are interesting with anti-gravity, the Gemini CLI. There are a bunch of engineers that are just being set loose to build. And I think they have everything going in their favor, I think, to dominate 2026 if they really want to. From an AI lab model perspective. So that's my bet. That's my prediction.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Let's jump over to the consumer side. Eric, we'll start back with you again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, so my prediction for 2026, like for me, it's a bit of a toss up between Gemini and OpenAI. I think, they're both really pushing on, good image models and good, consumer experiences. But I want to just share a little anecdote that I had as 5.2 came out. And, so the other night I was with my wife and we had 3 wine bottles and we were eating some Indian food. And I took a picture of the 3 wine bottles and I was like, which one should pair best with this meal? And I asked both ChatGPT and Gemini this question. And it was interesting because you get a question like this, you get into like taste, culture, you get into like nuance of there's not like a right answer. There's, what is a good answer? And GPT 5.2 gave me a really short answer saying, pick the Bordeaux wine. It's a good wine. It's more neutral. You'll get a good result. And then Gemini ranked all 3 of them, put the Bordeaux as number 2, saying it was the boring choice, and then explained all the nuances of the tones and the flavors, and then picked a completely different one for its first one. And I think if you're a consumer using these models, an answer like Gemini's is just a lot more compelling. And if you get a few of those in a row, it's going to really, really pull you in. And I think that's just something that Gemini is able to do with their model that's like, I think, higher taste, whereas the GPT models are leaning deeper and deeper into being the smartest models, which are really great for, enterprise coding, research, and scientific breakthroughs. But for a consumer who wants to pick a meal, that's not the model that's really going to give you the best choice. So I have to see what OpenAI does to address that. But for me, Gemini is doing such good work there that I can really see them eating away at that consumer share. So I don't know if they probably won't beat ChatGPT by the end of 26, but I think they're going to gain a lot of market share.
All right, Ray.
That's interesting. Man, for consumer, you know what? It's actually going to be OpenAI for me for a couple different reasons. And I think one of them is their like ability to ship software and keep their like hierarchy of politics really flat. So it's like product person, really product driven. The people who are driving product at OpenAI are extremely ruthless and they're going to like iterate really fast. Number 2 is like, I know a lot of employees from the fruit company who've gone specifically to go work there. And they have like really amazing UX and then product and like really deep level of knowledge that you only get by like being at these, frontier companies and then bringing that forward. Not all to mention Johnny, and he pretty much sold the whole entire design team from Apple and put them into OpenAI. You have that synergy and these people coming into a room. Like I would walk into different rooms and we would just have conversations, literally just over lunch or whatever. That compounds over time. I love Google and I love all the features they ship. But there seems to be that missing like cohesiveness of like fluidity of like they have these great ideas, but then now productizing them into a thing. And I think that's where OpenAI is really just gonna like it seems like they're kind of flat right now, but they're gonna just start to overtake if they continue this. But there is a difference, like you say, in the models, the quality and the responses. But at the pace that OpenAI is already kind of moving with the consumers, the people who are on board and the decisions they're making in the UI, I really like. When I use the ChatGPT app, when I show friends and family, it's much more easier to onboard. If you've ever done any type of onboarding from anyone who's new to using a Google product on their thing, it is a nightmare with all the different product spaces. So trying to unify that is, and especially in a very large company, politically, it's just extremely hairy from what I could see externally. And so that's my big take OpenAI is going to take it all.
Yeah, I hate that I am not going to have a different answer than the two of you because I'm on the same page. I honestly think OpenAI is going to continue to dominate the consumer space for 2026. I do agree with you though, Eric. I think Google has a lot of potential. I mean, you think about their search product that they have. So I think, I'd be willing to say that Google could start eating into it. But OpenAI, like they have the mind share. Like when you talk to people,
Mm-hmm.
like when they think of AI, they immediately think of ChatGPT. That's going to be hard to overcome.
Mm-hmm.
They've got their connectors and soon to be App Store that's coming out, so people are going to be able to do more stuff directly within the chat experience. I think that's going to be pretty enormous. I know there's a lot of like code red and stuff like that. I do think they're probably taking that very seriously. I think they probably are seeing a decline in users because of some of the pressure they're getting from these other models.
Mm-hmm.
But there's still an enormous, 800
course.
million monthly active users. I just think 2026 won't be the year that they get superseded. I think if anything, they're going to double down, go at the consumer. Their app store is going to either be amazing and like just blow up, and it's going to just unlock all its potential, or like I don't know. I don't see a future where that actually fails, but I could be wrong. Like it might not end up being something that people use. And then I think their shopping integrations. I think people are going to start doing and buying things directly in and from ChatGPT. They've already got connections with Shopify and Etsy. Yeah, I can't see another future other than OpenAI actually dominating on that front. All right. We're going to talk about AI coding agents. Now, there for a while in 2025, early on in the year, there was only a handful. Now, there's more than we could even probably list in an entire hour-long episode. Like, there's so many coding agents out there. So, first question, and I think this is actually kind of an interesting one. What was your biggest surprise of 2025 when it comes to coding agents? And Ray, I'm going to start with you this time on this one.
I'm going to do a couple of them. So for user interface, my biggest surprise, it just happened like the past week, is open code. Like it just became really good. The UI, the experience in the terminal and everything, that kind of has just been evolving from the very first product. When I first used it, everything was just kind of falling apart, to now everything's just kind of come around. I like this underdog story too behind the whole thing. It's like, it's open, we're trying to do this thing. And, that's kind of been like the biggest surprise in the UI space, as far as like, hey, this is like an underdog kind of coming in and then now trying to actually take over, because everyone's coming up with their terminal UIs. But the ergonomics of it are kind of cute. It's like it's gone really, really far. As far as like the coding agents and executing on things, in this one, my biggest surprise has been Cursor, to be honest, because I wasn't expecting them to like move as fast as they have in parallel in all these different areas, right? It's one thing to have a CLI that's really, really good, and it is really good. There's like other CLIs I've been using that are phenomenal, but it's another thing to have the UI layer on top of it too, and like just kind of the effects just keep compounding to me. And that's been my biggest surprise. And I think that's kind of where 2026 is going. And people are going to be like, oh, shoot, like this is the guy. They're like the ChatGPT of like agentic coding for, this new era. Yeah.
All right, Eric, how about you? What was your biggest surprise of 2025? I know you're building your own coding agent, so you've got a very unique perspective here. Coding agent, I mean, yours is a little bit more complex than that, but
yeah, there's coding agents in it.
Yep.
I'd say my biggest surprise of 2025 is how big terminal UIs became. Because, before Claude Code shipped, that wasn't a thing. No one was using terminal UIs for coding. And, if you look back at the beginning of 2025, there was like Cursor around, Windsurf was around, everyone was using VS Code forks. So VS Code forks were the meta. And, that's just really not a thing anymore. The people are all there. And now if you look at the end of 2025, you could see both Droid and OpenCode are building their desktop versions. There was Conductor that was around building a desktop, UI for it. So, I don't want to get into my predictions, but my big surprise was that, everyone kind of went all into terminal UIs. And I think it probably did accelerate the adoption in enterprise of these different tools because they're just like so versatile and implementable everywhere. So yeah, that was my surprise.
Yeah, and I agree with both of you. I was not expecting Terminal to take off as much. And Ray, I'm going to take a little bit different twist on what you said. For me, I had kind of written Cursor off, to be honest with you. So early on in 2025, they went through a lot of communication problems. Honestly, their agent didn't even rank very well compared to other agents. There was a lot of things with the changing in pricing and how that all happened and the way they communicated that. And then I would say not being transparent with how models are actually being nerfed behind the scenes. And then they added max mode, which I thought was kind of like a sort of, so you basically, I called it like an in-app transaction that you play for like a mobile game. Like you have to pay up to actually get the full benefit of the model when you were promised. I bought a year subscription, so I was promised that like this capability. They ended up nerfing it. They ended up changing the pricing, and then made me have to like pay up for something that I'd already prepaid for. So it was like this, all of this stuff that I'd kind of written off Cursor. But honestly, I think they've turned around a ton, and I'm surprised how fast they did. Like I think they have one of the better agents now. They have one of the better plan modes now. Everything is so smooth. To your point, they've got the CLI, which is actually really polished and really well done. Their communication still leaves a little bit to be desired, but you can actually see your usage now. Like you can see how much you're using, you can see how much you're getting billed. That was not a thing at the earlier, so there's more transparency to what's happening. I actually would have told you probably March, April of 2025 that I did not think Cursor was going to be around if they kept up doing what they're doing. But now I think they're gonna continue to be dominant because of how quickly they pivoted and learned from all those lessons. That's my biggest surprise. All right, we're going to go over to predictions for 2026. Eric, we'll start with you. Very specifically to AI coding agents. You know, there's a lot of them now. What's your predictions for 2026?
Yeah, I think there's probably it's like two parts to this. So one, I think there's gonna be some consolidation in terms of tooling. Like I think like, we saw how fast things moved in 2025. I think that like it's going to be increasingly challenging for people like doing like a UI on top of something to kind of stay ahead. Like the UI layer is going to get built out in 2026. We see that already starting. I think that's going to be a much bigger part of the next year in coding agent land. But my big prediction for 2026 is that like while we might see some polished new features and some consolidation, like I don't fundamentally think that the experience of using a coding agent is going to substantially change in the next year. I think we saw a lot of change this year as coding agents became possible, but I don't see like from here a huge jump in terms of like what we're going to do with them. Like I think model capability will allow more complicated workflows, more types of subagents, and more things to kind of experiment on mechanical kind of usage, but I don't think it's going to be like a completely different experience.
I like that. Ray, what about you? What are your predictions for 2026?
For 2026, I'm kind of zooming out a little bit, and there are a lot of experiences with like that I've been using Opus 4.5, but actually inside of Notion. So Notion has a little agent. And I used to spend a lot of time like step by step building these different dashboards and like different business things. And so what I'm actually kind of thinking is that the 2026 is going to be the year where this agentic coding that we've been seeing as engineers ourselves, we've known the capabilities. Now that they've been flying with tooling, it's going to go right it directly into the data where you live. So people who are working in like project management software and all these different apps, it's like, I don't need Siri anymore. I could just have this smart agent that can go research on the web, do my tasks, and do the different things, if you are able to do that. So I think, to me, I'm using Anthropic stuff a lot, but like it's going to be those types of whoever's going to go in there is going to win. Like Linear just started to integrate the AI workflows inside of there. So they're using the same agents underneath the hood. I'm not saying that they have like a specific agent, but they're using the tooling infrastructure that was made for these CLIs, for these things that are running in their businesses, but it's acting now on your data. And so wherever you are, like I just made an operations dashboard for the person who does my management of my stuff. And so like in a couple prompts, I just yapped the whole thing and I was asking her what the requirements were. We just put that in, send it over to Opus, boom. Like a couple minutes later, we had all the relevant data dashboards. And if I wanted to, I can just set up some webhooks and APIs with, Claude Code and be done and like hook the rest of it in. And so I think that's kind of 2026 where we're going to be at. It's going to be like people are going to be like finally discovering what we discovered with agents, but more like, hey, I can now put this into here. So it's going to be sort of like the MCPifying, but of agents. And if you know what I mean, I don't know how to really kind of word this, but it's just going to where people are at. Yeah.
Yeah, I could totally see that. Eric, I think I'm going to expand on sort of your first note you had said, which is there's going to be a consolidation, but I'm going to kind of add on it to a little bit. I think there's been so much investment put into a bunch of companies, and there's so much choice out there for AI coding agents that there's no way that I think all of those could survive, and actually be a venture scale business to the level that I think investors would want.
Do you want to just double click into that venture scale business point? Because I think it's worth explaining a little bit.
Yeah. So if you think about a company that maybe received $200 million in investment, the worst place that you can be as a company is what they call a zombie company. So basically, you are making enough money to survive, but you're not growing. There's no hope at like a big return. Investors do not put that much money into your company without the hope to make 10 to 100 times the amount of money they put in. So they're going to get a lot of pressure to either sell, or shut down offices. So I think like unless we start seeing some of these actually hit that venture scale level, especially with the ones that have actually received a lot of VC money, we're going to see probably a lot of shutdowns, merges, acquisitions. We're probably going to start minimizing the number of these companies that actually exist. But I also want to layer in the one caveat to that, I think, is some of these companies probably should start doubling down, sort of what Cursor's doing and Windsurf to a certain degree, and start exploring what it's like to own their own models. So because if Anthropic, OpenAI, Google were to turn off the faucet for them, they're out of business. So they're very dependent on these other providers to provide them inference. I think there's probably going to be a consolidation, and there's going to probably be investment into these companies that do survive to actually have their own version of models that they can actually manage, maintain, train, improve. And then, of course, they'll still keep relying on the other folks, but that'll allow them to offset a lot of costs and jack up their value, especially at the investment side. All right. So 2025 has been crazy. All of us have built with AI. We've built on AI. I think this is kind of an interesting place to kind of segue into what is your biggest takeaway from 2025? The world has changed so much. Eric, I'm gonna hand it over to you because you've really been. You left your job to go focus 100% on repo prompt, and I know that had to feel risky at the time and scary at the time. So, what's your biggest takeaway? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's just no more interesting place to be building right now than in this space, and there's just an endless shortage of things to build. But I think just in terms of AI lessons of the year, I think the big thing that I want to take away from how models are and what they're good for and how they work is that I think at the beginning of the year there was a lot of promise on, we're gonna have computer using agents that will click around UIs and do things, and I just don't see a path in the next several years even where that's a good experience. We've seen browsers that came out that tried to do it, and it's just very slow. Any click is very slow. It's just not a good way to work. But on the flip side, if you're using a terminal and you have a CLI representation of the app or just an MCP representation of the app, models are able to do several actions and at the same time do a bunch of things and execute on things in seconds where it would take minutes to do by clicking around. So my big takeaway is that we should stop trying to make AI models use UIs and instead just build UIs for agents, which is a terminal. And I think that's kind of what I was doubling down on with Repo Prompt, is building the agent access point for the tool. And I built an MCP server, and now I'm about to release CLI tooling for it, a way for the agent to use your tools. And I think more and more, if you're building an app, if you're building something, you're going to want to build a way for agents to use it with tools and not rely on clicking around. So I think that's my takeaway.
I like it. And Ray, how about you? What is your biggest takeaway from 2025?
I think my biggest takeaway from 2025 is the evolution of sequential tool calling and the introduction of thinking between the tool calling. So it's just these models just continue to be intelligent, and it's just proving itself to be true, where initially it was just a theory. And I remember building mega prompts just to achieve the same thing, right? I would send everything in, but I would send it in a very sequential order, right? And I would try to build these prompts. But now, it's very refined. We have a concept of context windows and things. And so that's kind of what I'm thinking. It's like, now that we have this as a base kind of truth right now for what we can do with these models, people are then trying to take them to add under other pieces of units of work. And for me, what's really interesting right now is the voice space. So voice agents and things that you would normally have to do if you're like a call center, or in businesses like in Hawaii, where everything's very traditional. People are not going to look up at your website. They're going to call you and be like, "Hey, what's up? What's the special today?" They will call, or they will just show up, And so things like that to unlock businesses that are still in these Hawaii is pretty like remote from compared to other places, but they're also kind of like interesting with like their technology integrations too. So like there's a lot of companies that are trying to integrate technology, and I'm thinking about, what's that going to look like in the future? We've evolved so much here, and now we have these models that we can put in place for relatively low cost compared to like normal human beings. And I'm really curious to see, like, I'm excited by that. That's probably my biggest takeaway. It's like, the tool calling with the thinking, to me, has kind of been like the biggest takeaway of like unlocking this new power for AI agents and stuff, I guess.
So for me, I think it's kind of interesting to me, like how much of a divide right now there is in even the programming community around using AI or not using AI. So my biggest takeaway, like the way that I would like to chalk it up is like, there was so much at the beginning of this AI craze where there were so many people hyping up engineers are going away 5 months from now. There won't be another engineer. I never believed that. I never saw that as a reality. But I do know that programming's changing, just like it did. So I started coding very young, like very, very young age. When Visual Studio first became a thing, and then you had syntax highlighting and autocomplete and things like that. Those were tools that I used that helped me be more effective at getting to the end goal, which was making a product that somebody uses. And I like to look at AI from that perspective. And I think I would love for more people to think about it from that perspective as well. It's not a bad thing. It's not going to replace engineers holistically. I don't see a path to that in the near future. But it is a tool that allows us to do more faster. But we still need to read the code. We need to understand what's happening. We need to be the major reasoning orchestrator that's driving these agents. And there's just so much hype on both sides, like the hate for AI and the AI is replacing everything. And I hope in 2026 that kind of converges down to reality, that this is a tool that we can all use, which is a good segue into my next question, which is, what are you hoping for 2026? I would like it to be more grounded in reality, less like we're replacing everything, to more, this is how engineers can be more effective. This is how we can use AI. These are the tools that you have available to you. Like finding that good middle ground. There are a lot of people on YouTube, and you can go to some of the Twitch streams. They hate on AI. And anyone that talks about AI, they're unskilled, idiots because you use AI. When the reality is, I think the best engineers that use AI could run circles around the best engineers that don't use AI. I just really do believe that. So anyway, that's what I'm hoping for. So I'll start that one off, and I'll hand it to you, Eric. What are you hoping for in 2026?
I think 2025 was a year of a lot of change. So I'm hoping that like while the models do improve in 2026, that like I just hope for a little bit of a period of stability where we can take some time to really explore what it means to work with these tools in new ways and focus on the user experience of them. That's been shifting a lot, but I think, as models have their kind of capabilities set for, which is what tool calling and interleave thinking, to your point, Ray, like as that is kind of the paradigm that we're kind of diving into and exploring and enhancing, I hope that things stabilize around that idea, and then we can kind of build good UX around it and make even better tools for ourselves. To your point, Adam.
I like it. How about you, Ray? What are you hoping for in this upcoming year?
In 2026, I want to see more of the software engineering workflow start to sort of blend into each other, and it's already kind of promising that design and engineering are starting to kind of blend as techniques here, but it's getting a lot of people to rethink their own like roles. And I think this is kind of where like I see where the puck is going. It's been kind of obvious that like, yeah, if you have access to a Gemini Pro, you can generate assets and images, and you can, not necessarily you're trying to take someone's game designer role or anything like that. It's just that it enables you to do much more. And I think it's okay to just try and experiment. So I want to continue to play with these tools, and like kind of what you say, Adam's like we're just going into these spaces and just playing. And I think it's just, I want more of that. And I'm just going to do it no matter what people say. And I think for 2026, it's just like, who are the companies who are going to be enabling that for me? I'm signing up for that. Like, okay, I'm on board with that train, because you're also kind of thinking in the same way, and all of it is in positive intent, right? None of this stuff.
Exactly.
I think all of us feel the same way. It's like, I feel lots of love, positivity, and I think about the early days when I hear Steve Jobs, when he was talking about, like, in some of the documentaries, they say like, somebody would come up and say, why did you remove the flash drive? Why did you remove the floppy disk? And he's like, and I think one of his, like, it's kind of really butcher this, but he just says like, those old people who are complaining, they're going to die anyways. And so it's like, it was just so forward looking, right? It was just so cold, but there is kind of some of that too. And some of the ways, like, as a child, if you're born, you only know the reality that you're born into. So I kind of like to always throw away my old thinking. And it's like, okay, what if I was just born today and this technology just happened, but I don't have any engineering experience, but now I have all these capabilities. What can I do? So just any companies that can get me closer to that feeling of wanting to play and then connect the dots together are going to be my big winners for 2026. And that's kind of what I'm hoping for.
That's awesome. All right. We've got two more to talk about. The first one is, we're going to throw a wild card prediction. So this is something that's probably unlikely, but it's something that you could see happening. And Eric, we'll start with you on this one. What's your wild card prediction for 2026?
Well, I think over the last, couple of years, we've seen a big change in terms of context windows for models. So we've seen, like, when we first got GPT 3.5, it had like an 8K context window, right? And we got 16, 32K, 64, 128. And then it got up to like 200K, and then you have Gemini with 1 million, and Sonnet did ship 1 million, but it wasn't very good after 200K. And I think my prediction is that, like, that 1 million is kind of the high mark of what we're going to really see models really support, because it's just too expensive to deploy, and and with the compute shortage and all the build out, like, I just don't see model companies, especially as they have bigger models where more context is just exponentially more expensive. I think we're going to kind of plateau at that context window for the next year, maybe more. That's my prediction.
I have a really spicy wild card prediction for 2026. I actually think XAI is going to come out of nowhere and just come in, and they've like been super silent, I think, for a reason, but their next models are going to be like taking over the coding space. And I think it's going to be, I think they're probably spending the extra time to kind of tune these things. I think they're just so, the engineers that are currently working on these things are just kind of literally working nonstop. It's kind of absolutely insane. And so there's a lot of buzz here in the Valley with XAI, and it's a little bit kind of not really talked about, and I think for good reason, because they're busy working, but that may surprise everyone. And I'm hoping that they take some of these techniques from DeepSeek about compression, and then the OCR stuff for long context stuff, and they're able to work and integrate some of that tooling. Somebody can do this, please. So it feels like it's impressive. But I think that's my wildcard prediction. If I were to put this from 2026 to, like, nobody saw XAI coming out of nowhere, like all of a sudden entering all these spaces and just kind of blowing up. So that'd be interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I really like both of those, honestly. I think XAI is something that it's a company I don't even really think about, because they aren't very good on the coding side. None of their models are very good on the coding side. So my wild card is going to be, going back to Meta. They have to be cooking something. They've dumped so much money into what they're doing. I have to believe they're going to launch something, and it is actually going to be impactful in 2026. And if they don't, I think you're going to see some repercussions from the investment that, that's been dumped into there. That the other maybe backup wildcard would be, and I don't know how feasible this is, but I could see something like a Google or Microsoft or like one of these companies or Nvidia coming in and trying to buy Anthropic and like trying to actually for a ridiculous amount of money. I'm talking like, so I could see Anthropic actually being sold in 2026 if one of these companies with all this cash actually are like Microsoft's
expensive,
not doing,
man. It's like $300 billion valuation. Yeah. That's like insane.
Amazon, Nvidia, Microsoft, they have like infinite cash. I feel like if they're going to buy, they need to do it this coming year. Otherwise, Anthropic's going to be $1 trillion company, and they're not going to be bought.
Damn.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's a good segue into the next one, which is, are we in a bubble right now? This is our last one. There's maybe a couple parts to this. Are we in a bubble right now? And if so, are we at the peak or where are we in the bubble? Ray, I'll start with you on this one.
Are we in a bubble? I think yes. Is it the peak or anything? I think this is like where people are complaining that the world is flat, but it's actually round. We're in this moment. We got a long ways to go. We're just starting this thing, and Columbus hasn't set sail yet. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, this space is massive, and that I'm now like being a hype man now. But like, I just think from it's pretty obvious as an engineer, like these core pieces that we would struggle with to do these things, that there's this translation layer that's happening. And I want to throw a wrench into this, and I don't really know a lot, but I think what's happening with what we're seeing at this level with language and being transformed from our thinking to being, able to communicate with our existing language layer. This is only one part of the layer that goes very deeper. So in the quantum space, there's a lot of concepts that we don't know about. And there's a lot of systems that are already automating in physics automatically that are happening behind the scenes to what we see, physically when we touch things here and whatever we discover. So if you have an agentic system that's doing AI things and interfacing with us at language layers, there's also other systems that are happening at quantum layers. And when they work together, a lot of biological things, there's like a lot of nature systems that will start to interface through these systems that have to communicate to us via language. And that's why I'm saying, like, our world is flat right now. No one's really realized the world is round. So that's kind of where we're at.
Interesting. Very cool. All right, Eric, are we in a bubble? And if so, where are we? Where are we at in this bubble?
Yeah, so we're definitely in a bubble, if only because we're getting to like I don't know if you've seen like relative spends, but like we're well past spending on the Apollo program and like the Manhattan Project. Like this is like even adjusted for inflation, like the amount of money going into this is like world-changing amounts of money. So yeah, we're in a bubble. Now the question is how far are we from the peak? I think we're still a ways out because, well, for one, like all the compute that is being built is being used, and used for, like if we're saying like it's only for Sora, like, I mean, for me, that's pretty bearish on the bubble, like, because that's a pretty bad use of the compute. But if we're looking at like what you can do with it, like, I really think there's going to be a lot that people don't realize AI models can do. People use like Gemini in Gmail and they're like, oh, it doesn't do anything. Or they use it in, Google doesn't do anything. Okay, but like if you go on GitHub and you pull down these CLI tools for Gmail, Calendar, all these different things that people have built, they work. Like you can ask an agent to manage your email, manage your calendar, wake you up in the morning, play your Spotify. There's like all kinds of stuff that you can do. And we haven't seen anything of that kind of reach consumers yet. And so when that does, I think that's when the bubble is going to really kick into high gear. And I think that we haven't really touched that yet. So to Ray's point, like, yeah, like we're still in the very early innings. And yeah, a lot to come.
Yeah, I tend to totally agree. We are definitely in a bubble. I kind of think we are in this place where enterprise companies need to successfully be able to implement and deploy AI solutions in 2026, or things could go downhill pretty quickly. I know we all probably read that article where like 95% of companies have failed at implementing AI in their products. I think there's a big shortage of understanding. I think we're still stuck in this mindset of trying to build deterministic software with AI. You just can't do that. You need to actually change your mindset around it. You need to make sure the ROI is right on it. So yes, I think we're in a bubble. I think 2026 is going to determine a lot. And I liked what you talked about, Eric, with the consumer side, like being able to add additional tools. Because you're right, like my wife, the only thing in AI she probably uses is Google search, and it's just built in there for her. I would imagine eventually that's happening with email. That's happening with all the things that she uses on a daily basis. And she doesn't even really know that AI is kind of driving that because she's not thinking about that. The other thing, Eric, you brought this up because we were talking about it before, but there's also like hardware shortages. And I think what's interesting, especially with RAM, one thing I was thinking about, I don't know. So I was just getting in my career around the dot-com bust. And what was interesting is all this investment was going into data centers and all of this stuff was going in. And what we found out is a lot of that was provisioned and built and not used. So I like your point on we're still using everything that we can actually do. Like we're at capacity everywhere. But when that bubble popped, what we were left with is amazing like data. We had data infrastructure. We had all of this like capabilities that were still there that we could then build on in kind of a stable way. And even though the dot-com bubble popped, there were still fundamental things that came out of that were incredibly valuable. So I think regardless of where this goes, we're going to land with great infrastructure for processing AI. We're going to have great companies and capabilities that are going to come out of this. So I do not see a total implosion of this bubble. I don't think AI is going away, but I do think at some point, the $1 trillion spend that some of these companies are doing for things has to be paid back. And that if that isn't paid back and enterprise isn't incorporating it, we will see a downward trend on at least valuations and investments anyway.
Can we just print more money, so therefore that trillion spend just seems much smaller in significance?
We will either way.
We will. Is low-key, is Apple cooked? I mean, I want to hear your guys' take because, I'm a little bit more biased having seen a lot of things, but what do you guys think?
So I was thinking about this too, Rick, because I think I've kind of come to realize Apple and Amazon both have kind of no-showed the AI. It's just, if you think about what Amazon's doing is they do hosting but like they're really not doing that much on the AI side like I would expect them to. And Apple's very much the same way. I actually don't know. I wonder if both of them are in a wait to see mode. They're letting things stabilize out and they're playing the long game. They feel like they don't even want to be part of the race. I could be totally wrong, but I think they have so much money, both of them, that they're not cooked, but I also think they're probably in a wait to see. And back to the acquisition side, Apple's another one that could come in and grab one of these big, maybe it's not Anthropic level, but they could grab like a big AI lab of some kind and immediately like be in the game.
So I think Apple's greatest stroke of luck is that Gemini 3 is really good. Because they have such a massive deal with Google for the ad side, and as long as that deal is still lucrative to both sides, then they get a huge discount on basically free AI integration with Gemini. And there's like this rumored deal that they're going to use Gemini for their Siri revamp. So
that would be amazing.
And I think Google definitely has the chops to make that good. And if that ships and they integrate it well, I think all of this is moot. Like it didn't matter that they were late. Like they have such a huge adoption.
You just blew my mind because I forgot that Gemini or Google has these smaller models that go onto their devices, and then Apple's kind of been dominating in this space with MLX and these other frameworks. And I can't imagine if they're smart enough to see where the puck is going, especially with this partnership with Google, is to make these smaller on-device models partnership with Google, training on Google TPUs in private clusters. And then Apple has infra now because they have Apple's like a whole integration with their servers too. So like they have server infra and OS infra that's secure and can run on Apple's private clouds too. And so, okay, this makes more sense now.
Wait, but I have some cold water to pour on that a little bit, just because we have all this RAM shortage coming around. And I think that if there's like another prediction for the next year, which is not like fully AI related, is that RAM in phones actually plateaus or goes down. And that's super bearish for local inference. And I think like, we saw in 2025 that, the Mac Mini came around and you can get it with 16 gigs of RAM in the base model. I think that's a thing of the past now. RAM is too expensive. So local models, I think it's going to be a tough time for them this next year.
So
Yeah,
you
I
mean my
mean, like,
safe is gonna have gold, a gun, and then like a Mac Mini with like 512 gigabytes of RAM?
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely.
yeah, you're gonna have sticks of RAM like in your safe.
Yep.
All right. Well, gentlemen, this has been fun, and it's been a pleasure like working with you through
Absolutely.
the episodes. I'm looking forward to kicking this off again next year. This will be the last episode. We'll kick back off the first week of January when we're all back, and I'm sure there won't be too much that happens in this space. Things move kind of slow in the AI space, right? Like, so we'll see how it goes. But I hope you all have a great holiday.
Yeah.
Eric, Ray, do you have anything to kind of close out with here?
Well, I think our real wildcard prediction for 2026 is that we're the #1 AI coding podcast by the end of the next year.
exactly
So there
right.
we go.
Yeah, that's right. You are tuned in to the Rate Limited Podcast, the #1 AI podcast in the world. If you
There
haven't
you
done
go.
so, make sure you like and subscribe. Tell some friends. We need to up these numbers right now. We just crossed over 1,600 subs, and we appreciate
700.
everyone who's been able to. 1,700. Let's go.
Yeah.
Everyone's comments actually mean the world to us, and this is just an incredible show. I thank you guys so much for also showing up. Adam with the brilliant idea is like, hey, let's start a podcast. You know, get Eric in the mix and stuff. This is like my most favorite moment to come together every week to just kind of catch
Same.
up with you guys, and it's so
Absolutely.
cool. And catching up with the comments, I love reading everyone's comments who've been commenting different things, and you know, there's like little stuff that everyone talks about. It's like, hey, we can actually now afford Adam's last name, thanks to crossing the 1K subs and stuff like that. So this is
That's awesome.
yeah. So big shout outs to everyone. Happy holidays for me. Have the Catholic background. Merry Christmas to those folks as well, and everyone else around the world as well. I appreciate. We have a show worldwide. From California to the rest of the world. And thank you guys so much for showing up.